An unexpected community. During difficult times, it is often the practice of individuals to seek out new ways of making connections and building communities. One such community formed during this ongoing pandemic, led by Kathryn and Lorienne. Inspired by the studies and discussions led by Vanessa Zoltan and Casper ter Kuile, the hosts of the Harry Potter and the Sacred Text podcast, this community was formed with the intent to apply a similar practice to the works of J.R.R. Tolkien's world of Middle-earth. One of the most fundamental tools in reading a work as a sacred text is to study each chapter through a different theme. For chapter 1 of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Party, we used the lens of hospitality. It quickly became evident that while each chapter covered a new theme, this initial focus served throughout the book. This paper will further expound on that premise while analyzing ways in which that same trait can be used for community building in a wider world. By way of introducing ourselves and our method, we would like to share two thoughts on what we call the hospitable practice of sacred reading, which helps us to feel at home in the story as we look beyond authorial intent or context to personal connections to the text. We can identify with Bilbo's despair in the gathering of the clouds, while Gollum's grief at losing his precious helps us to examine where our treasure really lies. We can be hospitable to our myriad selves as we see them mirrored in the characters and offer hospitality to growth and changes that we need to make. A second act of hospitality via sacred reading is that it does not require the reader to start with any familiarity with the text to study it in community. Lorienne is the beginner and Kathryn is the experienced Tolkien reader. Studying one specific theme per chapter and pairing the text with a sacred practice offer a common ground for us as well as our listeners. These instruments ensure that anyone at any stage of reading may participate and contribute. New and longtime readers alike can build community while sharing reflections on the text, and sharing understanding allows bonds of friendship to be tightened. This kind of hospitality also comes from sacred reading when we raise up and listen to voices that are not always heard. We can hear the women, the diverse, or the queer characters who are not necessarily depicted.
Diving deeper into the text itself, reading The Hobbit is an experience of hospitality. It was originally written for children, and many children enter Tolkien's world via this work. Short chapters, frequent addresses to the reader by the narrator, and of course the occurrence of catastrophic events make it a pleasant read. One is never scared too long. By the end of each chapter, the right path or door is found, eagles appear, or the Battle of the Five Armies is summarized in the text to explain what happened while Bilbo was unconscious. Certainly for Lorienne as a new reader, the first reading is all that was needed to make her feel at home. Kathryn heard about Gandalf and Thorin first as bedtime stories in childhood, and as an adult can see that, as Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. For all the perils and travails of Bilbo Baggins, his saga teaches all readers that the most ordinary person can overcome extraordinary obstacles, and people of all ages can derive inspiration from that. And I mean it. Let us first consider examples of good ghost-host relationship. In the text, right away in the opening pages, we learn that a hobbit hole is comfortable, not dirty or nasty. While to be hospitable demands a generous and cordial welcome, it is incumbent upon both guest and host to create a pleasant or sustaining environment. All of these things are in Bilbo's home and in Bilbo's first words in the book, "Good morning." Later, he invites Gandalf to tea, and while he may mean it to be a polite dismissal, he ends up offering perfect hospitality to Gandalf and 12 dwarves. His larder is stocked, he has a variety of fermented and other beverages, and he apparently has plenty of other chairs and spaces. Of course, he is welcoming to all, not just hobbits and specific family members. A wizard and a dozen dwarves are not turned away. While Bilbo is rattled and surprised by this unexpected party, he rises to the occasion. By the end of his adventures, Bilbo tells the dwarves, if ever you are passing by way, don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you are welcome at any time. This instance shows his deepened sense of graciousness towards his visitors after his journeys, and it shows that he is a true member of the company. At Bag End, the dwarves in turn mirror his hospitality by being good guests. Order is restored without a single blunted knife or chipped plate. Traveling items are left by the door, and the dwarves contribute music and storytelling to the evening's activities. Throughout the book, they are forgiving of his missteps, showing hospitality to the burgeoning burglar. They may not have liked riding the river in closed barrels, yet they thank Bilbo because they are still alive and free. Lastly, when two of the company take him up on his invitation to come to see him in the Shire. The dwarves play the complementary part of hospitality by being good guests both before and after their adventures. A subsequent stage of this journey to the Lonely Mountain is at Rivendell in the House of Elrond. Their host is noble and fair, but Tolkien takes time to note the perfection of the house. Whether you liked food or sleep or work or storytelling or singing or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Elrond does not reap benefits by welcoming the dwarves in, but they depart with clothes and bruises mended, and while their bags are filled with provisions, their plans are enhanced by the knowledge and wisdom imparted by the Lord of the Last homely house.
As Thorin and company reach queer lodgings, we find an echo of the unexpected party, when Bilbo, Gandalf, and the dwarves impose on the hospitality of Beorn. The skin changer, who is not expecting any guest, much less a mixed company of 14, is imposing and imperious. Gandalf has already prepped the party by describing Beorn as a very great person and warned them that they must all be polite when they meet him. One wonders if Gandalf gave the dwarves any such preparation before the gathering at Bag End. Even with Gandalf's staggered introductions, Beorn is unsettled and surprised. Similar to Bilbo, Beorn ends up responding with hospitality beyond the wildest hopes of the travelers. The group are fed, given rest, and outfitted for the next stage of their travels. What is most fascinating is that Gandalf appeals to Beorn's hospitality with humility, not springing everyone on him at once and beginning the parade of dwarves with Thorin's good manners. By the time Bombur arrives, Beorn is both interested in their tale and delighted to host them. Such magic is not the sole provenance of wizards. In a chapter entitled A Warm Welcome, we come to see a contrast in good hospitality tempered by self-serving motives. The master of Laketown hesitates to welcome the dwarves because of his fraternization with the elves. But Thorin has scarcely announced his return when the people remember the old allegiances, and the matter was settled without the master. Amid the excitement, the dwarves and their hobbit are doctored and fed and housed and pampered. The songs concerning riches and prosperity are sung with gusto, but Tolkien recounts that new songs speak of the coming victory of Thorin over Smaug and the benefits to come. The people of Laketown seem to make the company so warmly welcomed because they hope for a return to the mutually beneficial state of things that existed before the coming of the fire drake known as Smaug. It is certainly a form of geniality that the dwarves are expected to remember once they have reclaimed their mountain home, and the betrayal of that by Thorin is grounds for the conflict that ensues.
While the miserable lakemen create a pleasant environment with questionable motives, the elven king of Mirkwood is the first example of an adversary who treats his guests well. We are told that if the elves have a fault, it is a distrust of strangers, and this explains why the company of Thorin are never quite able to reach the feast they see in the forest, but their king sees the starving dwarves' desperation as a blatant attack. Thorin is well fed in his captivity, but there comes a time when he got over his thankfulness for bread and meat and water. Bilbo, who is never detected as a guest or an intruder, is promised to be honored and thrice welcome after he barters the Arkenstone to sue for peace and serves the interests of the elves. It is when Bilbo repays him for the unwitting hospitality he enjoyed during the dwarves' captivity that Thranduil names him Elf Friend. There is friendship forged in this example that carries on to Bilbo's heir, but it is hard won. A turning point in his career. The events so far illustrate admirable behaviors on a limited scope. There are other examples of which there are malevolent hosts with malicious intentions. The Great Goblin is the most obvious figure to fill this role. In spite of Thorin attempting to show him more courtesy than he did to Bilbo Baggins, he and his company are treated as thieves, murderers, and friends of elves. Thorin even refers to the Misty Mountains, in which they are now prisoners, as hospitable in an attempt to establish a rapport between the rightful heir to the kingdom under the Lonely Mountain and his deadly foe, who is another leader. That it quickly devolves into chaos and a fight for survival cannot entirely be blamed on the dwarf, because the aggression of the other party was on the part of a bloodthirsty murderer. Next, we are introduced to an insidious yet less obvious villain in Riddles in the Dark. Baggins meets Gollum in this underground home, and the course of Arda's history is set along a specific path. This does not seem to be the case, of course. Tolkien informs the readers that it was a turning point in Bilbo's career, but he did not know it, and tells Frodo in The Lord of the Rings that Bilbo was meant to find the ring and not by its maker. The turning point creates a fateful strife between the Baggins of Bag End and a previous ring bearer, but also ensures that it passes into the hands of those who would not wish to possess or use it for the gaining of power. Tolkien identifies Gollum as quite alien to a hobbit. He is a small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. Tolkien says in The Hobbit, though Gandalf identifies him as hobbit kind in the Fellowship of the Ring, and postulates that his people were akin to the fathers of the Stores. The sort of encyclopedic knowledge is not readily available to a nervous Baggins who has stumbled upon his fate without knowing it. It is divinely appointed that it is not another member of the company who comes into contact with Gollum, and his truth is most plainly evident in the things they share. There is an unexpected and completely unintentional social contract between Gollum and his guest because of their distantly shared heritage. The slimy creature's likeness to hobbit folk is not evident in the social mores that are on display in this chapter. Gollum's opening address identifies burglar Baggins as a choice feast, a tasty morsel. And while Bilbo has previously shown himself to be both an accommodating host and a grateful guest, he cannot be faulted for unsheathing his elvish blade to ward off his apparent adversary. It is Gollum himself who proposes the game, and that forms their common ground, since he recalls playing with other funny creatures sitting in their holes. He is anxious to appear friendly at any rate for the moment. This is soon belied when his clues prey on Bilbo's discomfort in the depths of the mountains and vulnerability in the dark, while relishing how nervous Bilbo is upon hearing the riddle that alludes to devouring and destruction. It is then with an act of unlikely grace and pity that Bilbo responds with riddles that remind Gollum of things from the life before the cave or his youth before the ring. He twice speaks of nourishment in the face of Smeagol's emaciation, and speaks into the gloom of Gollum's cave, a puzzle about flowers turning to the sunlight. It is perhaps an effort to appeal to the less alien side of his predator, but it also reminds this rapacious creature of a wholesome life.
I would take back my words and deeds. In both scenarios within the caverns and tunnels of the Misty Mountains, there is a catastrophic imbalance between guest and host. The enmity with the great goblin leads inexorably to bloodshed because the goblin's acts and attitudes make a pleasant and sustaining environment impossible. In a similar fashion, Bilbo and Gollum will never be able to coexist peacefully, and the corrupting influence of the ring can be identified as the culprit. Gollum's relationship to the One Ring transforms him into a predatory and suspicious creature, whereas Bilbo uses Gollum's precious to deceive and evade him because the Ring of Power has begun to ensnare him. With such clear-cut examples of constructive and destructive hospitality, the murkiest waters are where there is wrongdoing, but also restitution. Because of the wine and bread he pilfers while undetected in the halls of the Elven King, Bilbo gives Thranduil a necklace of silver and pearls from the treasure of the Lonely Mountain. It is then that the king, who admired him for his cunning, calls him elf friend and blessed. A thornier path to reconciliation is between Bilbo and Thorin. While the dwarves are bewitched by the hordes of treasure, Bilbo becomes a virtual prisoner, the 13th member of a party of 12, behind the barricade formed against elves and men. His desperate claiming of the Arkenstone is an act of service to a leader who has turned on his guest, while it is also a betrayal of his host's trust. It is Bilbo's most benevolent act of burglary, but Thorin finds it impossible to forgive. It is upon his deathbed, when he has come to himself once more, that Thorin tells Bilbo, the child of the kindly West, that there is some courage and some wisdom blended in measure. The message of the Hobbit is summarized in the assertion that if more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. Hospitality within the hero's quest. Thorin departs his life in admiration for what he sees in burglar Baggins's values, and it is worth considering the influence of those things on Bilbo. Throughout The Hobbit, there is frequent mention of the struggle between Bilbo's Took and Baggins sides. Within the trope of the hero's journey, the protagonist must go into the unknown in order to birth the hero within. And at the start of the story, his Tookishness is a relatively unexplored territory. He copes with the discomfort of yielding to his more adventurous impulses by imagining himself back in his nice hole by the fire with the kettle just beginning to sing. His Baggins nature offers comfort to the more inexperienced Took within. It is for this reason that Bilbo the Magnificent can be identified as someone who values those things that make a merrier world, and this is a form of self-caring hospitality in which he can make space for his inner Took. In conclusion, Tolkien has made a hospitable world in The Hobbit where all readers are welcome. Many, of course, stay and go deep into all the dimensions of Middle-earth that Tolkien wanted to share. This small gift, The Hobbit, can show people at any age that hospitality is a worthy gift in any situation. Welcome the stranger and kinship forms. Be gracious to a foe and an alliance may form. Be curious and listen to people with more attention to their stories than to your judgment of them. If the larders of our souls are well stocked with these, the world will be merrier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. It's interesting kind of putting each of the encounters in those different areas next to each other and kind of considering how they are different and similar and how that kind of reflects culture as well. So thank you. Okay, so on to the questions. If I just open up, there we go. Okay, so one of the questions asks, do you think this theme of hospitality is mainly influenced by Old English mead hall culture or by Tolkien's own Christian hospitality? Beorn's house was likely mirrored on Heorot in Beowulf, for example, where the Lord welcomes his retainers and provides for them.
Kathryn,
Lorienne, would you like to take
Okay.
this, or shall I start? I have
You
a
start.
response
You
on
start.
both. I think that there are certainly elements of that allusion to Beowulf in the idea that Bilbo and a number of the other hosts in this text are akin to Hrothgar. I apologize for that. It's very early here in the United States. But I feel as though Thorin is the one who is most expected to have the kind of hospitality that mirrors or is based on the mead hall cultural aspect of it. As for the Christian perspective, I believe that it does have some validity in considering that Christ in the New Testament expects us to welcome in the stranger, who is expecting us to clothe the naked and feed the hungry and that sort of thing, as it's mentioned in Matthew 25.
Super, thank you. And another question asks, and this was something I thought myself as well, was what connections or differences do you see between Bilbo's hospitality in The Hobbit and that we're presented with in The Lord of the Rings?
I think that's a vast topic that would certainly be beyond our time limits. But you see for example, Bilbo's party then at the beginning of Lord of the Rings, where he, I'll get it wrong and Kathryn will correct me, but I like half of you, not nearly enough, and not. Yeah. So he's a grander host and a more welcoming host there. We are applying that theme to every first chapter, so viewing it as all 6 books, seeing hospitality as that first theme is very interesting. And I'm especially struck by the very start of course, the Two Towers, seeing hospitality in Aragorn as he struggles to decide whether to try to find Frodo or try to follow Merry and Pippin when they've been absconded. So he is trying still to be the host and leader of this fellowship, which has just fallen apart. So it is there in a grander theme, and I think it still runs through.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Right. I'd like to thank you both for your paper and what you've brought for us today as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.